Reptile Fight Club. I'm Justin Julander, your host, and with me, as always, is Rob Stone. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
Excellent. Yeah, things are pretty good around here as well, and life's good. Heading out on a cruise next week, so that should be fun with the family, and I'll have to make sure to turn down the heat in the reptile room, but I think it's kind of cold out there already. So the winter is upon us here in the West. So I don't know about you, but it's getting cold around here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not the best. I'm dreaming of herping, and that's about all I can do is live vicariously through others that are out there doing that in warmer climates than mine. Yeah. But Jordan just texted me. He just got back from his trip and he sent, 20 pictures over. I'm like, oh man, he finished strong. I think he saw, maybe we'll save it for when
save it for when he
we'll get him on. Yeah. He can come and talk about it, but several, many species of python,
Wow.
and, a lot of cool other stuff. So, should be cool to hear his recap of a pretty epic, huge trip across most of Australia. Started in South Australia and went, kind of across the top end and over to the East Coast. So pretty impressive. Okay. Yeah, he's hardcore. He went with his whole family all that way. So it's pretty cool. So hopefully we can get him on here to talk about that sometime soon.
Did they have to circle back, or was it a point A to point B?
I think it was point A to point B, and they flew out of Brisbane area, maybe. I know One of the pictures he sent was of a southern anglehead, so they're a little further down the coast than Cairns. So I know they were in Cairns for a bit, and I know he's got family over there, like cousins that live in Brisbane area. So yeah,
cool.
Yep, that's pretty epic trip. I'm excited to get some of his stories recorded because pretty amazing story. At least a big one that I'm thinking of, but also finding some cool animals. So looking forward to having him on. So hopefully he'll agree to come on. I may have overpromised here. Yeah.
Right in the sense of for as much as he's done, I don't think he's been on any podcast, right? So
yeah, right. I don't know if he's kind of laying low or he just doesn't like the limelight, but yeah, that guy's he's the real deal when it comes to herping. So it'd be good to get him on here at least and get some of his input, especially on herping and some of those.
Maybe I should reach out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what else. Breeding season's kind of in full swing. I've seen some locks and some good signs. So hopefully things are moving forward. My womas are in their new caging, and I think they seem to be enjoying that. And I see some kind of naturalistic behaviors, which is kind of cool. I did some, fake burrow types systems.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that.
Yeah. And it seems like they're using them, and cool. Kind of coming out to bask in the light that's just outside of the entrance of the burrow type thing. So it's kind of fun. Cool. And they've been locked up quite a few times. I don't know about the blackheads. I see the female's been hiding a lot lately. She's not interested in food. So I wonder if she's gravid already. I bumped up her light. So she has more. I think last year I didn't give her enough heat after she had ovulated. And I think I didn't want to repeat that problem. So I turned on her lights a little bit more. I turn them down in the summer because it just gets so hot, if the lights are on all day. So I just have them come on in the morning and then in the evening but in the spring and I guess middle of winter, I don't know. I'm going to give her a little more heat, but yeah.
Interesting. So when you say more for duration, or are you changing the bulb?
Duration. Yeah, just duration. So they can get, up to kind of that. I think this time of year it's lower, like, high 80s, maybe up to mid 90s or something right under the basking spot. But the male's been out cruising around, but I haven't seen the female much. So she's kind of hanging out in the nest box a little more. So I don't know if that's a good sign or not. I mean, she comes out in the morning to bask and then in the evening as well. So maybe it's too.
Which ones are those, or what's the background?
The Western blackheads.
I thought so.
Originally from Casey Lazick's direct lineage, from his breeder animals back. Ryan Young dug somebody up that had, a pair that he purchased directly from Casey that, were of a specific bloodline or whatever. And then Ryan was able to get some animals from him. And then I got a pair from Ryan. So,
okay. Yeah. Interesting.
And the babies, I moved them up to the next cage size and a couple of cage sizes above where they were. And they're, seem to be doing well. They're growing, cool. The little eye guys. So it was
right. That's a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah. Yep. Last year's clutch, I basically collected the eggs as she was laying them, but they were kind of weakly shelled. And I don't know. I think it was a heat issue. She didn't have enough heat early on because she goes really early. Like she lays like in February or March. So that means, counting backwards, she should be close to ovulation or ovulation around this time. So I guess that's what I figured how I messed up last year. It's always, I don't know, what can I screw up next, it seems, but what do you do? Yeah. And then putting a few new pairs together this year. So we'll see how that goes. I have some holdbacks, striped spotted pythons and some granite spotteds that I threw together as well. So see if any of those go. Yeah, they were kind of a disappointing surprise when the granites hatched because they were supposed to be pure Cape Yorks and they were not. So I was kind of bummed out about that. And I haven't had much luck with Cape Yorks for a number of years. I think my pair's kind of done. So what do you do?
Right.
May have to pick some up again.
So it used to be the Fantastic Four, but now how many?
I know, right?
For the set at this point?
No, because I don't have the pygmy bandids, and I taught a Facebook friend. She got imported some from Europe, like paid a couple $100 for them, brought them in from Europe. I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna have to give that a shot, or just wait till she breeds them, and because it's an adult pair, I think, or some older animals at least. So I'm like, man. I didn't think she was going to be able to do it. It's like, oh, good luck. I wish you the best. And then thinking, oh, there's no way. And then she's like, hey, I just got my pygmy bandids from you. I'm like, what? Shoot. If I would have had more faith in, I would put in an order for a couple, had her bring some more over while she was at it, split the shipping costs. Cause that seems to be the biggest challenge, is getting them shipped over. So pleasant surprise, but so there's some in the country and that's encouraging. Cool. And, so I saw Warren Booth posted some on the chat. So he's got a pair from Nick, I'm sure. So I'm like,
oh, I guess I missed that. Okay.
Yeah. He posted them this morning. So you'll have to check them out. They're really nice looking. So I'm like, well, I guess he's higher on the list. I did talk to Nick about him, to be fair, but I didn't want to pay the price he was asking. So I was hoping to have something to trade that he'd want.
Right.
But, yeah. So
no dice.
No dice. Yeah. Maybe down the road. I don't know. But things seem to be progressing nicely in the herp room, and hopefully have some good clutches this year, and paired up some inlands as well and some jungles. And so, we'll see what happens.
It was a little late last year, right? So hopefully it's the bounce back.
Yeah. I don't want to go too hard though, because I don't want to overcorrect and produce like a ton of stuff, So, and I also got some more caging, so filling up some more gaps in the room. I've got a big gecko tank for the leaf-tailed geckos, and I need to move that into this room, my podcast room, because it's a lot cooler down here than it is in the herp room, and they're just not designed to be at ambient herp room temps like 80s and stuff. They're like a 70, 60 degree animal rather. Those are I found their cousins at like 50 degrees and they were out hunting and stuff. I'm like, this is insane. What a cool gecko, tough geckos. So out in the middle of the winter, I could see my breath, and here I am in shorts and a t-shirt, but as soon as I found one, I'm like, oh, I'm much warmer. That
I'm great.
The blood pumping. Yeah. The adrenaline rush heated me up nicely. So cool stuff.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, how's your season going? Have you paired much up, or you?
No, all my stuff is spring. Yeah,
till later.
Spring on the front end. So everything's good. I actually, for the first time, possibly, certainly the first time in volume, got some chicks and was feeding those out as sort of a differential thing. I've done quail before. Otherwise, it's mostly mice. But yeah, so that was interesting. And the funny bit on that, right, because for years and years, right, there was so much focus on, if you feed them that, then they'll never go back or, whatever. And just as kind of everything was my peak times to feed or kind of March, April, and then September, maybe the end of August through into the beginning of October, something like that. Yeah. So for the most part, and then it's sort of very intermittent after that. So I had ordered those and, so I was like, feed out a bag of 25. And it's just sort of, so then I'm putting 2 or 3 into some of these things. And it was amazing how long it took them to take them. Because again, for the most part, everything is mice otherwise. And so I think that's very streamlined compared to, these wings and feet and all this stuff. So it was taking longer than I was used to. And then you could tell that felt heavy to them. So it sort of sat heavy for a day. And, it was funny that the next night, again, just sort of in the reptile behavior sense, the next night they were all out looking for something else. And that would include whether they had 1, 2, or 3. And then it was the night after that then they were all hidden away for like 2 or 3 nights. So that the next night they're like, hey, let's give it another shot. And then after that, they were like, okay, let's go sit on the heat and try and work through what we got going. Right. But then, I just happened to have, I was like, let me try these other mice and things. Maybe a week later. And every single one I offered took one. So that the whole idea of, if you feed them a chick, or quail, they'll never eat. I haven't found that to be my experience at all. I think that's probably more an artifact of trying to feed them too frequently or feeding them, too much so that they just don't have the drive to eat.
And then sticking a mouse in their face and going, "Oh no, I've screwed it up."
Yeah, because
they'll never eat again.
Yeah. And I know that Eric has talked about that as well, where he's like, I'm mixing in mice to rats, quail certainly. And this would have been, he's been talking about this for several years at this point. But it was like, so I don't know if he was doing chicks or not or whatever. But I do think there is some utility to kind of stretching them out. And so that was sort of the thought with these chicks is like, they're readily available, right? Because they're really functionally a byproduct of other industry of human, and so I was like, let's give it a shot. It says it's, the functional range of weight, but the average weight per chick in the bag was something like what would be a sort of weanling mouse through to like 2 adult mice, 2 full adult mice. And I was like, okay, so there's going to be a real range here and just sort of picking which one to give which and whatever. But I don't know. It was interesting kind of all around. So I'm excited to keep trying it, not as a consistent thing, but as it's just
as a treat now and then, or something to throw in the mix it up a little. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, I don't know, the rats to me, rats are super smart. They definitely are cool. I've had them, a pet rat and all those things as a kid and that sort of stuff. But their hair is so coarse that to me, even when, we feed them at Pro Exotics and all, or at the zoo or whatever, they feel kind of gross. I don't know if it's just as you're manipulating them, you're going like, I can't imagine wanting to eat that. They kind of get that greasy. It's almost like their hair either holds or accumulates more oil, or their skin does or something. I don't know. To me, it's something, a feel to them. Even super clean, I'm not talking about grody rodents or whatever, but just I'm going, well, I guess Nick ate them right at Carpet Fest, but I look at it, I'm like, sure, a mouse, the chick seems more appealing. A rat just doesn't seem super appealing to me.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, Nick did peel the rat, so it didn't have its skin. Cooked it on the barbecue. It wasn't, he didn't.
Oh, natural. Just take a chunk.
Take it down whole. You have to eat it like a snake, Mike. Well thought. Warm it up a little.
I'd say he eats like a duck.
I'd say eats like a duck.
So I don't know if you've done that or if you.
I mean, Heidi and I were breeding quail for a little while, and it was mostly eggs. And I actually threw a couple eggs into the jungle carpet python enclosure, and they ate them. And I was like, I did not expect that because it's a smaller egg. I mean, basically, didn't even like fill up their mouth kind of thing, she ate it and swallowed it down. And I think I even like kind of tongue fed it, and she just like gently took it and like knew what to do with it. So that was kind of cool.
That's cool.
But I didn't have much more luck with eggs. I thought, oh, cool, somebody took one. But I was just like, she's going to eat anything you put in front of her except a rat. She's a mouser. So she's like, perpetually hungry, it seems. I think that one weird thing is I had some holdback jungles from her and the male, and they're both mousers. Like they won't touch a rat, even when they're extremely hungry. But I offered their offspring a rat and they took it without hesitation. And I was like, whoa, this is cool. I didn't expect that. And the other jungles I got some from Jordan a while back and they're all rat feeders and everything. So, I guess that's the kind of the thing that I worry if I fed them a mouse or a bird or something, then would they go back on rats? Do I want to risk it? Yeah, but I'm sure it would be fine either way. But that's
so maybe the answer is it's
the thought you have. But I think once they, once they
rats, I don't know. I just suggest that maybe the reason people have, obviously there's utility to feeding rats, right? A, it stretches them out. B, just in terms of market dynamics, it's more practical to feed one small or medium rat than it is to feed what's the equivalent weight in mice, probably 4 or 5 adult mice. And both from a practical purpose of price in terms of what that would cost and, price and time. Right. And even if you're drop feeding, it's like, if you're leaving multiple items, often there's probably wastage there where they just don't necessarily work through the whole group or what, so either your time or actually losing some that aren't consumed. So I don't know.
I was listening to something. Was it? It was a podcast talking about feeding, and they were talking about they fed like much larger meals than people typically fed. Who was that? Anyway, I want to say it was like William Philippek, maybe.
It sounds vaguely familiar.
But I can't remember exactly who it was, but they were talking about feeding larger food items and seeing, some wild pythons that had eaten, and of course there's the rock python eating an antelope and things like that, but
right, it can't get away. It's more likely to be seen, right? Because it can't hide in the same way that. Sure.
And maybe it was a specific group or something, but it was ball pythons, because they're saying they feed theirs like meals that people would think would just be way too big, but they were just fine. They'd eat them and they'd come back for more, And I remember Ben Morrill, he did his PhD work with some of the records from TSK from the Sutherlands, and basically came to the conclusion that you can't feed a ball python too much. Like they never reached the point where it was like not
a decline.
Not a benefit to the, to them and the snake or whatever. So like, they're fat or they're, that kind of thing. Like, they're not productive anymore. Like you fed them too much or something, that kind of thing. So it seems like, we would have to try really hard to overfeed a ball python, especially in a large collection like that. So I don't know. It was really interesting, but I guess I'm not sure why I got onto that, but the whole size and I think too, like some things we feed too much, and some snakes, especially pythons, I would think would be a lot of pythons anyway, are very efficient, and I think about Matt Somerville's, brown snake that 2 mice a year, and they were full of fat bodies and just, overweight for that species, but that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other part of that too, though, right, is that it has to be the system that works together. So I agree. I think maybe it was William that was talking about that. Obviously, if you're going to be feeding those big meals, you're going to, or you will run into issues if you're not really providing access to solid heat to promote the digestion. Right. Otherwise, you're going to get the, either it'll take longer or it won't be as efficient, and either you're losing stuff on the front end or stuff's coming back up. So it has to be a whole approach, right? If you're keeping snakes in the Barker Phillip sort of style, there's a reason you're going to tend to feed smaller and more, either more frequently or not, right? Smaller meals more frequently is because they don't have that extra thermal capacity to digest a giant meal that they're sitting on. Right.
Right.
So,
and then the whole, there was a paper that was published with different temperatures and meal sizes and things, and looking at efficiency and that kind of thing. I want to say it was with Southwestern, just with Imbricata, but I can't remember exactly. I know we put some quotes in the book. Yeah. But I do remember, I believe it was Gavin's research that showed, or he mentioned this where on a podcast, that if you feed greater than 20% of the snake's body weight, then that's when the organs expand and, you know, all that changes occur. But if the meal's less than 20% of the body weight, then that doesn't really push it into that phase. So kind of an interesting thought, you know, that smaller, more frequent meals may also have the benefit of not ramping up all the organs to change, and maybe, you know, it doesn't mess with them as much as like feeding multiple large meals in a row where they're kind of up and down with the size of their organs. So I don't know. I thought that's been kind of sitting on my back of my brain.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I'm trying to think then in a non-neonate context, if I ever offer an item that would be more than 20% of their mass. I think the answer is no. Like,
yeah, I'd be curious because, I mean, a big rat, what are they, like a couple 100 grams?
Yeah.
And I mean, you'd have to feed a 1,000-gram python, 200-gram rodent to be 20% of its weight. So that's a pretty substantial meal. That's a pretty good sized rat into a not that huge of a snake. So
I mean, picture like a 3-foot chondra that you're putting, but then again, people did that, right? They just don't stay that size for very long.
They grow much larger. Yeah. And you wonder too, like, I mean, you know, thinking of kind of that in the whole context of biology and, you know, big males, you know, obviously some males want to be big, but then at the same time, you see reduced reproductive capacity and such, you know, at least associated with obesity, maybe not necessarily size. Like if you're a wiry, but you're giant because you grew a lot and you can take down all the other rival males, maybe, you know, I don't know. There's an advantage to that,
right?
At least in the context of, you know, species where male combat is
male combat.
Thing. Yeah. So that was, that's interesting. I know the boys were talking about that on, the men, the guys were talking about that on, Carpets and Coffee, or no, on their breeding episode. I was just listening to that the other day.
Oh yeah. With Keith. Yeah. I have those queued up. I haven't listened to them yet. I'm excited to.
Yeah. It's pretty good discussions and some interesting topics for sure. But in that same context, you know, the size and combating males, they were talking about combating males, and if it multiple males is a good thing. I maybe we could cover something like that in the future, you know, having multiple males.
So many ideas.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously it's probably the modus operandi for a lot of different species, you know, like the diamond pythons with the mating balls and things like that, or anacondas, or I think you had some species that the
Solomon Island tree boas did the same thing. Yeah, where it's sort of one would work, and then the next one would come, as it got tired out, the next one would go. Yeah. And
where you might need that many males just to keep up with such a large, you know, robust female with a little more energy or capacity to get out of there or push them away.
Exactly. Yeah, it was fascinating.
Yeah. So. Interesting. Okay. Well, good things to think about anyway.
Right.
I don't know. It's always great to get together.
It's always complex.
You know,
exactly. Like that's all these things suggest, I could see it being A or Z, you know, or anywhere in between.
Right. Yeah.
Or both.
Or all of the above, you know, can it work? And I think there was something not too terribly in the past where I saw like diamond pythons that had injured each other in the wild. Like there was one male defending a female or something like that. And like some of the other males had like bite marks from the male. And he was aggressively, you know, trying to fend off the other males from the female. So, you know, obviously that's not the normal for them. And I could be getting this wrong. Maybe it was coastals, but that would make a lot more sense. But it seemed like it was whoa, that doesn't fit, you know?
It was asynchronous rather than being what you would expect.
Yeah. Because coastals, you'd expect that. But I think this was a diamond and it was defending females from other diamonds. So, or it was at least an intergrade or something.
Right. Well, that's what I was about to say. I was like, where was this from? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Because if it was intergrades, maybe that fits and it's a little more of the other side coming out. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah. When one parent's a pacifist and the other's a warmonger, where does the child fall? So that's interesting. But yeah, I you know, that nature is so dynamic and changing, and you know, like thinking about taxonomy and all those. I was listening to Ipers talk with Chris Applin on his podcast and you know, they had some interesting topics that always a lot of times I'll get ideas for this podcast just by listening to other people talk about things. And, you know, that I guess that's kind of how this was born anyway, is like, people don't challenge things that are said, you know, like, you know, let's dive into that a little more kind of thing. So I'm like, a lot of times I'll be yelling at my phone or something, ask him that, ask more about that, or challenge him on that kind of thing. But I guess,
I heard, right. That's I think it's a little bit less so in, you know, for the most part, reptile podcasts are pretty accessible. Most people are pretty open to feedback and whatever, but you know, I know, someone had compared the experience of listening to podcasts to being that of a ghost, where you're listening to this and you're yelling into the void. You're saying, no, what about this? So at least this is our forum to enunciate ourselves as ghosts.
Exactly. So. Yeah, for sure. And maybe someday somebody will come up to us and go, I recognize that voice. I've been yelling at you all this time and you never hear me.
Well, it happened with Owen on our first trip, right?
Exactly.
Or our second trip.
Wait, you're Owen? The Owen McIntyre? Here in our little establishment?
Absolutely.
After in our cage of gotten engaged, right? Yeah. That's funny.
Oh, my goodness.
All right. Well, we got another listener request, which is very appreciated because sometimes lately we've been very busy. So, you know, the podcasting day rolls around and we go, wait, today's podcasting day. What do we got? You know, so we really appreciate, you know, your suggestions and happy to talk about whatever kind of topic you may like to hear about. So keep them coming. But this one's from an international listener, from Eric. I believe it's Wachtel, but if he's German, he lives in Germany, and so I would assume that's how he pronounces his name. But I'm no German expert, although I lived there for a little bit and speak some German. But he wanted us to talk about and I should have given him the option to jump in. He messaged earlier pretty recently. So I thought, hey, we need a topic. Let's go with it. So I didn't give him the chance, but Eric, if you'd like to come back at some point and
when we invariably fail to present all the arguments that are sort of circulating in his mind, then absolutely we can circle back. Yeah.
So that offer is open, although we kind of neglected to provide you that option this time around. Maybe next time. But thank you for writing in and letting us know what you'd like to hear about. So the topic that was suggested is venomous keeping, advanced reptile keeping, and our venomous keepers, advanced keepers. So I think, you know, this has, you know, a little bit, I get we're not necessarily venomous experts or keeping. We don't keep a lot of venomous. I've kept some in the past, and I think you have as well. And
Helas, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have some experience there, and I was definitely not an advanced keeper when I kept a couple rattlesnakes, which may not have been the best idea, but turned out to be okay. But so we may expand this to cover a little bit more broadly the topic rather than just focusing just on venomous keeping because of our lack of experience in that regard. But so hopefully we don't get in too much trouble with Eric. But again, thank you for writing in, and we'll do our best. So I guess that's the fight topic for today is, do you have to be, or should you be, I guess the should or have to be an advanced keeper to be a venomous keeper, versus can you start out with venomous? Is that an option? Is that a possibility? So I think one side may be a little bit harder to defend, but let's flip a coin and see who gets to decide which side they defend. Go
Tails.
ahead and call it. It is tails.
It is tails.
You have won this week. What would you like to defend?
So, yeah, as you say, so the one side seems, I think there's to me, there's one really compelling piece. And then I'd love, you to contrafactual what you put out. So I will take the sure in at least one contingency that jumps to my mind. Okay. And then there's a couple kind of subsidiary points that I had in my mind. So sure, I'll try and defend, but I will check you. Go ahead and get us kicked off.
Okay. So which side? I'm the yes,
it's a bad idea.
Advanced keeper. Oh,
no.
It's a okay.
Yeah. That yes, you should be an advanced keeper.
Okay. Before you keep venomous. I mean, yeah, that's kind of the obvious thing. Like, if you have experience with other species, maybe especially the ones that bite frequently, and you can avoid getting bitten and, get some sense of working with animals and understanding their body language, you might, have a better shot at avoiding the downside of keeping venomous, which would of course be a venomous bite. I think while, each kind of group has their own body language, and just because you're good with one doesn't necessarily mean you'll be good with another, which kind of, I guess, goes to your side. You could still have some experience working with snakes, handling snakes, avoiding the pointy end, and that sort of thing. But and I think that's I guess that's where I'll start, is having experience with others may help you in regards to, so if you're an advanced keeper, you have a lot of experience with a lot of different species before you dive into venomous. It's probably a reasonable and a wise idea.
Right. Yeah. So there are a bunch of different, I suppose, qualifiers and things that had run through here. So I'll toss those out kind of as we go. But I do think, the contrafactual to the point that you had made is, well, if you're not, if you're gaining, yes, you're gaining experience, but you might also be gaining negative practices, right? If you're used to corn snakes, even though maybe you're conceptually, you've applied this idea that, oh, it's actually a cobra, it's not a corn snake, or whatever the case may be, right? Whatever's in your mind as you're doing this, and I'm going to engage with it in that way. If it isn't actually, then it's possible that you're developing habits that you think are useful, but in reality, there's a subconscious pull of actually, it's a corn snake. And so you're kind of gaining this repetitive skill, right? But that it's actually doesn't have the utility that you think that it does, because it actually wouldn't work in that context. And then when you actually make the switch, right? When the game is for real, right? Maybe, in times you might not, that experience that you have, it'll help in the sense of, okay, I know the snake needs fresh water on this schedule, feeding obviously the ability to keep animals well is a skill that's accrued over time, and experience is huge for that. I'm just saying that it's possible, right? And we even see it in the field sometimes where it's like you think you're going to act one way and then you wind up acting a different way, right? When it's for real, your experience doesn't necessarily cleanly translate always in all situations. So I do think that's true. To me, the kind of fundamental point, I think that I saw of saying when we were having this conversation, when would it make sense, is when only that one thing will do. right? When fundamentally your goal is to keep that one thing, I don't think keeping a simulacra is probably even fair to the the animals that you're doing it with, right? If your only interest is in keeping whatever it is, the thing that jumps out because it's so different, and you sort of hear people talk about it in this way, would be like keeping a king cobra, right? Which obviously is
came to mind for me as well.
That's very, we would traditionally, that's very advanced, right? But there's really nothing that's an equivalent animal to that. Sure, there are things that are closer to it, but if the only thing that we'll do is you say, I want to have one king cobra, then I don't know that it really will be fair to the animals or fair to yourself if you're saying, well, I need to keep corn snakes for 10 years before I could try doing that. I don't know that really has a ton of utility. I think for the most part, when we're talking about advanced, I guess the situation that made sense to me was theoretically someone could have exposure to training in interacting with venomous animals, but no exposure to keeping animals at home, or maybe no exposure to keeping animals at all, right? Maybe, I'm picturing like the Thai Red Cross snake shows or whatever, right? So that's daily interaction with venomous snakes, but maybe you have someone who's only engaged in the handling and doesn't actually hasn't kept a snake at home. In that context, I guess you would be an advanced in your capacity to interact with the animals, but a new person to keeping an animal in a box. So that was sort of the thing that has jumped out, was like the construction where maybe it makes sense is someone where only that one thing will do. And it really isn't fair to the animal or to the person to say, no, you must put in all this time having these interactions that are not what you're seeking, even though, as we all know, right, be open-minded. Maybe that'll open a new window and it turns out you love Sumatran short-tailed pythons and it's not just king cobras or whatever. I suppose that's conceivable, right? We need to be open to that possibility. But assuming that's not the case, maybe you could have someone who's a new keeper but has crude training so that it's not obviously the downside, right? When we're talking about either venomous animals, large varanids, as you highlighted, large constrictors, in those contexts, we're really talking about the risk both to the person interacting with it and to everyone around them, right? That's and we've seen that, unfortunately, in terms of these venomous snake contexts where like, okay, a venomous snake that gets out and much less gets out of the person's room, house, whatever, and into the wild, that's incredibly dangerous and is for a good reason. The reason people that don't like snakes will love to pass legislation saying you can't legally keep them. I mean, certainly in Colorado, we can't keep venomous snakes.
Same here.
Interesting. The law is written that way, at least at this point, and maybe we can get to, maybe that'll crop up here at some point. But, it's super interesting because, that really is ammunition to that. And I can understand why. I don't think even the most strong-hearted herper amongst us can't appreciate the fact that it really is a public safety risk to have venomous snakes wandering around, non-native, particularly venomous snakes just wandering around a neighborhood.
Yeah. Now, I guess, we might define advanced keeper a little better because I don't necessarily think, I think you've made a very strong point that keeping corn snakes is not going to prepare you for a king cobra unless you're gathering them for food down the road. That might help. But I think maybe when we say advanced keeper, maybe we mean more a responsible keeper. You're willing to put forth the time to go train with somebody who does have experience with venomous. You have the funds to be able to afford, the type of caging that's required to have anti-venom on hand, and not just rely on some zoo to be charitable to you. I think those kind of come along with experience and with maturity in any reptile keeper, as you go along. Maybe in the beginning, you either do an impulse buy or you're just so excited you want to get it and you don't do your research and you just buy it because you saw it and you liked it and you wanted it right now. I think that's kind of what we look at as a beginner move. And then all of a sudden you read a few YouTube or watch a few YouTube videos and read a couple online articles, and now you're the expert and you're telling everybody what they're doing wrong. Obviously that is not an advanced keeper move. And so, I think we could maybe define it better that way. If you're going to be delving into venomous, you do it the right way. You don't rush into it. You don't do it irresponsibly. And then therefore, you're going to have more barriers in place to negative things happening. Now, obviously, you could be the best keeper in the world and still get a bite or still have issues, but you're going to have those things in place that's going to minimize the damage or minimize that risk to your life. And I think in that regard, you're an advanced keeper, and you're going to, and so I do think for sure in that regard, you should be an advanced keeper, at least in your brain.
Yes, your intellect, your approach exactly. to it. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I've been lately. So I had a big backlog of herp podcasts, and it's that I've been working through, and it does seem like there's been a higher percentage than sort of what we used to see, or what I typically would consider of people who got into reptiles later, rather than sort of everyone says. I've been hearing it a lot, kind of framed as, "Oh, mine isn't the traditional story," and that's sort of been the sort of common refrain at a higher clip than I'm used to.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and there was one that was super interesting where, unfortunately, I can't think of it, or even trying to think of which show. Yeah, which show it was on, or whatever. I think it was the. It'll come to me, but it's the guy who I'm supposed to go on there soon. It's the one with. He calls it a salamander cave. I think it was a guest on that show.
It's not.
I'll work through it. I'll figure it out. So it's a newish show. He's from the Midwest, and it was someone. I think it was some guy in the Midwest who said, "Oh, I'm almost 60," and his son, they had gotten garter snakes, and next thing you know, he's has these snakes himself.
Was it the idiot, the expert in the idiot? Is that the?
It podcast? Could be. That wasn't the one I was thinking of. Okay. But it could have been on that channel. For sure.
Because I do remember hearing, that
what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. And it was like, so I guess that's sort of what I'm imagining so that sort of satisfies at least some of the criteria that you were laying out in terms of advanced, in terms of approach, resources approach. And if instead, rather than pythons or colubrids or whatever, his fixed idea was, it needs to be a blue insularis, or it needs to be a king cobra, it needs to be whatever, presuming that's legal in his jurisdiction. It's like, if that's the only thing that'll do, I guess I can see that. Again, those seem so extreme even to me that I guess the easier thing would be a Gila monster. If a Gila monster was the only thing that could do, I do think that is more accessible. And it actually, this whole conversation kind of recalls when Phil and Scott, mentioning him again, we're on here, and I think it was on here, right? And you guys were chatting through, like, essentially, can you learn how to keep venomous reptiles without keeping them? Right?
That was or without handling. Can you keep them without handling them? Can you shift cages? Or you
that whole
missing
thing.
The experience? Yeah.
And so I think it kind of all fits into that same conversation. And I guess I could imagine a context, again, I think a king cobra is a whole nother level of thing, in the same way that a leopard gecko is not an iguana, is not a croc monitor. That does seem like an extreme example, but something like a Gila monster does seem relatively achievable. I guess the key underpinning there is that does call to mind the Gila bite in the U.S. a year or two ago, where the fella had collapsed and wound up dying. The super interesting thing, speaking of reptile podcasts, Stephen Mackesy was on Snake Talk talking about venom in the last month or two. Really great episode. I would highly recommend that. Dr. Mackesy is a super interesting guy up at the University of Northern Colorado. His story itself is very interesting. There was a ton of, it's one of those, I'll definitely have to listen multiple times. The complexity that's being presented, the complexity, subtlety, nuance that's being presented there is really, really good. It does a good job with it. It's just so confusing, right? It was one to call our own experiences to mind, or at least, we could visualize this, is, I guess, the 3-finger toxin in Boiga irregularis is essentially exactly the same as in cobras. It's just that somehow it doesn't, it is incredibly problematic when put into birds and amphibians, or either lizards or amphibians. but when it's in people, there's essentially no impact because of the way it's interacting with our different, nerve receptors and things.
Yeah.
Our proteins and nerve receptors. But it's actually the same structure. It's just how, so again, speaking to all this sort of subtle complexity, right? A bite that wouldn't be bad in a person, but is, fatal in birds. And I think it was birds and lizards.
Well, and it seems like too, juvenile, toxins kind of change during the development.
They do. Yeah, he gets into, they both get into levels of toxicity, what they're supposed to interact with. Yeah. Quantity is another issue. Absolutely. So the interesting, why I bring it up, beyond just presenting a tangent as ever, would be that he mentioned specifically that bite case and seemingly what happened. And I do wonder then if there are underlying medical conditions or externalities or whatever. But the point was, I guess, the particular components of Gila monster venom is particularly reactive to, it dilates blood vessels, which can cause a drop in blood pressure. And seemingly the reason he would have collapsed like that would have been sort of a response, his physiological response to dilation of his blood vessels, causing him, his blood pressure to drop rapidly. Of course, that begs the question, well, why is that the first time in 100 years that's happened? And it does make me wonder whether he had underlying conditions that would predispose that to be a problem, right? If he already had low blood pressure or had externalities that would factor into that. And it reminds me of the, law school doctrine and tort, that the eggshell skull doctrine, right? So if you interact with if you punch someone in the face and it turns out they have some condition where a person who a normal person taking that punch in the face has no problem, but this person, it fractures their face, that's on you. You take them as you find them. This is the, unfortunately comes from a case, in law that someone's underlying condition, even when not obvious, you're still liable for the result, even if it's not anticipated. It all kind of popped together to me out of that, of saying, well, I wonder if there was something about that where it would cause, in 999 out of 1,000 people, the reaction would be this. In this particular person, the particular effect that's particularly prominent in this species happened to, we got the worst case nexus.
Yeah. That mix of whatever factors are involved just resulted in the worst outcome,
right. The highly atypical, unusual.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. And I mean, there's, they've discovered some things that are certain regional groups are more susceptible to different things than others, so it's genetics plays a role in a lot of these things. And, everybody might consider a brown tree snake safe, right, but it has some weird interaction with your
people from place X or whatever it would be.
So that could be a factor that people just don't consider. And I mean, I think, unfortunately, we live in a society where everybody loves that crazy. What's the word? I always space this word out. The news likes, the murder stories or the right, guy gets bit by a venomous snake kind of stories. Where I'm sure if you're a responsible keeper and something happens, I think of like Terry Phillip. Terry has how many interactions a day with venomous snakes, and he's been bitten once, and it turned out to be a wild, prairie rattler. What are the odds that that's the one that got him? Whereas the ones he's working with in the zoo all day,
right? The famous clip that would go around of him looking. People are always so shocked at how normal and routine all his interaction, his filming, exactly, and it all looks so normal, and that's the part that seems atypical, but in fact that's what's kept him safe.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of a funny aside, that video of him feeding the cobras, that was at one point attributed to me. That they said that I was the person feeding the cobras, which I had to correct them. I'm like, actually that's my buddy Terry. But yes,
that's funny.
It's kind of funny. Okay. But I think to whatever. Now, of course, people that are, I'm macho guy. I'm going to get this cobra and nobody can tell me what to do, And frankly, I really do think there should be a pathway for anybody to keep a venomous snake if they want to. I mean, sure, put hoops in the way, they have to meet a certain criteria. But I think in some ways, if you just say no, blanket no, you're going to promote some irresponsible behaviors, because somebody, like you said, if that's what you really, really want, you're going to find a way to do it, whether it's legal or not. A lot of people are going to say, no, I think the risk to keep that outweighs the risk of me getting caught keeping that, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then the consequences, if it gets out, are, now we've got to make a bigger ban on every snake, that kind of thing. So why can't I think of that word? Sensationalism. The sensationalism.
We finally got there.
Yeah, exactly. I can never remember that word. Well, I guess I just did, but I can seldom remember that word when I need it. But sensationalism kind of dominates the sphere. And so, if anything happens in that realm, there's going to be extra focus put on it. It's like, the recent shooting of the healthcare CEO that's dominated the news. My daughter was complaining. She's like, what is going on with this? I don't know what this is about. And I keep getting all these stories on my social media feeds about some CEO and he's dead or something. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's not seeking that, but it's coming to her because that's kind of what our society thrives on, especially in America, like that sensationalism and these crazy events like a snake bite draw people in and make them want to watch the news if there's reports of a snake bite. I know there was a ton of discussion about the recent inland taipan bite. I never really looked into that. I maybe should have for this discussion, but I guess that really draws attention. So I guess that's part of being an advanced keeper, I guess, in this regard, since we're defining it how we want to right now. I'm saying you've got to be, media aware as well and know that if anything bad happens, it's going to be overblown and you need to be prepared with some kind of way to combat that or see through it. So for example, if you have if you're prepared, if you have your antivenom and you've kept them properly and it was just a fluke.
It's legal.
It's legal. Yeah, exactly. You're following the rules of your state and you get bit. It's less of a sensational story because they're not like, oh, this, he has no experience and he's keeping this snake and he didn't have antivenom and he had to beg the zoo and they saved his life, those kind of things. Yeah. Whereas if it doesn't even make the news because it's so mundane because you've covered all your bases, I would suggest that's probably a responsible way to keep a venomous snake. And now, unfortunately, I think a certain group are drawn to large snakes or large varanids or venomous snakes. And now, I'm not going to lie, I was drawn to those. I wanted a giant python. I still want a giant varanid at some point in my life. It's just that interaction with a Komodo or a water monitor or something like that. Parenti is just cool. Now I could probably get that from the wild, and so I'll probably just stick to herping and seeing my venomous snakes and my varanids in the wild rather than trying to keep them in my garage. But so I would suggest that might be an alternative to keeping them in captivity is to go interact with them in the wild. And now I've seen some pretty crazy behavior from people handling them in the wild, but it doesn't seem to make the news like a guy in, Indiana getting bit because he had this illegal cobra in his garage that got loose and now is on the loose in, in the neighborhood. So I think those kind of things, can really help at large, our community and things like that. So if you're drawn to those thrills and spills, then go do it in the wild because then you're in some other country because there aren't any giant python. Well, I guess Florida, maybe. Florida, man.
Well, Florida's a different country anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So, that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, part of it too, right, in terms of the sensationalism of the whole thing is, it's what the dog bites man, normal story, man bites dog, that sort of idea is that, if you're, someone in its normal context, if someone got bit, in Thailand by a king cobra or something like that, that's unfortunate, obviously unfortunate, but it's not, it'll be like, oh, well, that's what happens when you go to the jungle, right? The same person who's going to be viewing the Indiana story, and that's not even where it was, right? No, but in our sort of universe here, that is more man bites dog. Whereas if it happens over there, it's just like, well, that's why I don't go to Thailand or whatever it would be.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Because I wonder too, because we had the two buddies in Florida. One got bit by a wild cobra in Africa or Southeast Asia, wherever he was, and the other one got bit. Wasn't it at
I don't know.
Crutchfield's place.
I don't know. Okay.
The tattoo artist that keeps Venom.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, Nolan? I wonder if there's a difference in the reporting of those stories.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
But then again, it did happen in Florida, so maybe it was just that's what happened.
A different country, anyway. Yeah.
Florida man gets bit by a snake, not as dramatic as somewhere else.
And I think the other part of it too, right, and something that we're constantly aware of or think about or whatever, even, in the context of the brown tree snake stuff, is that it's like what we, our constant refrain is that foreign protein is foreign protein. And you kind of, in the same way where, if you're engaging with that without due care, then you're taking the risk that it turns out you're the eggshell skull relative to that protein in people. Right. Yeah. I know, there was the unfortunate, Nipper's friend had died right over the summer, right when he got bit by a viper in Georgia, the country of Georgia, that isn't perceived to be that bad, but he had an anaphylactic reaction to it.
Yeah.
So that it's, which is wild.
And I think that's part of this. I mean, everybody knows wingsuiting is dangerous, but there's lots of people who go fly in wingsuits. I mean, not lots. I mean, relatively few. Same with like free climbing and things like that. I mean, odds are, if you're a free climber, you will die while free climbing.
You're more likely to. Yes, absolutely. There's certainly a correlation.
So, I mean, I think if you are keeping venomous snakes and, chasing venomous snakes and handling venomous snakes a lot, there's much greater risk, of course, of dying of venomous snake bites. So, but again, if that's what you're passionate about and that's what's going to make you feel alive, then I have no qualms with you doing that as long as you are responsible about it, and I think that becomes what an advanced keeper is a responsible keeper, maybe.
Right. Well, and the other part of this too, kind of, combining all those different ideas is defining venomous, right? In the first place. True. Right. And, and again, in the context that could be variable, right? Yeah. What's one of the most popular pet snakes nowadays, right? You see them all over Instagram digging down. It's a Western hognose. Yeah. And, certainly that's not nothing, what's going on there. Right. And,
well, my coworker, they have a pet hognose, and one of their daughters kind of called out, "Oh, the snake bit me," and they said, "Oh, are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine." And then like a few minutes later, "It's still biting me." And they're like, "Oh crap. We just thought it bit her and let go."
Yeah, let go.
Kind of latched on
like a feed bite.
Yeah. And so they of course then they went in and kind of helped get the snake off of her finger or wherever. And then they watched her finger kind of balloon out, and they got really worried and took her to, into the Instacare or whatever, and got her checked out by a doctor, nursing staff or whatever. So, and she didn't, have any severe or long-term consequences, but it did swell quite a bit and was fairly painful. And, it was a smaller snake. They didn't expect that reaction to occur. So, but again, they understood like this could be potentially dangerous. So we're going to take the precautions and take her into the Instacare. I've heard of other keepers. Oh, I heard a great story about this keeper that got bit by a venomous lapid in Australia. And he called his friend and said, I've just been bit by X, and, I'm going to wait it out and see what happens, see if it was a dry bite. And, I'm feeling okay. And then all of a sudden he just stopped talking. And the friend freaked out and ran over there. Now, from the person who got bit's perspective, they could remember everything that was going on. They were just paralyzed, basically. They couldn't move or talk or respond. So the friend comes bursting through the door, and then he sees his friend on the ground. He's dead. He's killed. The snake is killed. And so he remembers hearing all this. And then the friend came over and realized he wasn't dead, got him to the emergency room. They administered antivenom, and he came right out of it and was just fine, So
but again, with the complexities of the stuff, right? The pre and post synaptic stuff. So, there's a huge difference in terms of the efficacy of antivenom, right? Depending on all these different peculiarities.
Yeah, exactly. And some, you can have a reaction to the antivenom and have another wonderful story of a responsible behavior is Ben Morrill. He and his friend, what was his name? I met him a couple times out here, but anyway, they were on a scout trip, and Ben and his friend had found a rattlesnake and had pinned it and picked it up, and they were showing the other scouts the fangs or whatever. Well, one of the scout leaders comes up and said, "What are you guys doing?" And he said, "Oh, we caught this snake and we're showing, and one of the scout leaders took a glove and hit the snake while, it's Brendan was holding it, Ben's friend Brendan, and the snake swung and bit him. So he got bit by the snake because this scout leader knocked it out of his hand with a glove. It's what are you thinking? And then he went to the emergency room and they gave him antivenom, and he was allergic to antivenom and started having anaphylactic shock. So they had to combat that, so they're going back and forth between venom and anaphylactic shock. I don't think he had any long-term consequences. I don't remember him missing a digit or anything like that.
Right.
He went through some painful moments there just because of some idiot that, wasn't even involved with the handling.
Right.
You never know. So, you even have
externalities.
Exactly. You have to be aware of others that are, may have a wild hair to smack the snake out of your hand while you're holding it, which is ridiculous.
So wasn't there the Marco Shea, right, where he had gotten bit in Brazil when it's the isolated field station. I think it was on Word on the Snake Vine, going way back in terms of the podcasts and whatever. Yeah. I think he was talking about this where they were using expired antivenom that didn't look clear because it was the only thing available, and it was sort of, okay, well, we'll give it a shot. And I think he went temporarily blind.
Wow.
From as a reaction to this antivenom.
Yeah.
Wild.
That's crazy.
And I presumably, whatever, when he was on one of his several parts with Nipper and Phil on Venom Exchange Radio, that maybe they talked about it as well. But I think the first time that I'd heard it, was in that context of Word on the Snake Vine. So
yeah. Yeah. There's obviously a lot of things that can occur. And I think it was Joe Mendelson. We're going to have him on the podcast in a couple weeks here, but he you'll have to correct the record when he's on here, but hopefully he'll tell this story, but he was handed a bag with a snake, and a graduate student had misidentified it, and he reached in and grabbed it and it bit him, and he put it back and realized what it was. It was a highly venomous snake. And he just sat there saying, well, this may be my last sunset, so I'm going to enjoy it. And he just sat and watched it because he was too far away from any medical help and had no, and so there probably wasn't even antivenom for this species where they were out in the middle of the jungle or whatever. So, but it turned out to be a dry bite, and he, was fine. So, but yeah, those kind of things, even in a professional setting like that, where you would think the graduate student would be a little more cautious, or, you know, a little less cavalier. And same for, you know, the researcher, where you're not just going to reach in and grab a snake just because somebody told you it was fine, you know, that kind of thing. You'd think you would look in and ID it yourself, but when you're tired and you've been herping all day, or, you know, doing this survey or whatever, you might not be thinking straight. So, and I do think that probably falls in line with part of the, you know, venomous keeping, being responsible venomous keeper, is that you can't do things when you're tired. You can't do things, you know, like you have to be on your game, or else you're going to risk a lot more than, you know, what other regular
the leopard gecko keeper is risking.
Yeah. So that's kind of something to keep in mind. I think the worst bite I've ever taken was from a rat from my feeders, and my rats don't bite. Like I think I've been bitten once, and it was like a fluke weird thing where I stuck my hand in the rat bin to grab one of the females or something that was gravid. The male ran over and just latched onto the meat of my, you know, palm and gave me a deep chew there. And I ended up having to go to the Instacare to get it, you know, get some antibiotics and get this rat bite cleared up, because my hand started swelling, and I'm like, oh man, I work with all these snakes that everybody's so worried about, and the worst bite I get was from a rat, you know?
Yeah, I think mine is too, you know, from a pet shop, you know, working in a pet shop, you know, 15, 20 years ago or whatever. Yeah. And that one was just mean. There was no mistake. That one was just, he was just out for my
expected
finger.
It.
So.
Yeah. It's crazy. So I don't know. Yeah. There's lots of caveats, of course, to this, but you know, I think as long as somebody is conscientious, they take the necessary precautions, they cover their bases in regards to, you know, considering the sensationalism of the news or whatever, in case they do get bit. You know, I think there probably is no reason why somebody couldn't start with a venomous snake. So I guess, you know, we can kind of both win, because
No, I think that's true. You know, I do think you could define a use case. Is that the typical one? No, far from it, right? And most of the people that would be sort of amenable to asking, you know, where that they're seeking that, probably don't meet the criteria, kind of this very elaborate set of circumstance that we've talked about here. But yeah, I don't think it makes sense to fundamentally say no, never, right? Hey, because that's rarely the case, right? That you couldn't craft some singular circumstance where you'd say that makes sense. In reality, it's about, you know, there are plenty of people with experience for whom it would be a very bad idea. And there are people just with their personality and experience and with the right approach that it might not be.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's a great idea, but it might not be a bad idea.
Exactly. And I mean, I think there could be other species that might scratch that itch. I mean, I don't know if what the draw is necessarily. I mean, I guess it's different for everybody, but you'd think there are a lot, like, for example, you know, in the US, we've got the, whip snakes, coach whips, those kind of snakes, which are basically
lapidae snakes,
without the venom. You could,
or dry markon. I mean, it's probably, you know,
you could see kind of the same sort of behaviors or activities or
responses
and things like that, and not have the risk of envenomation. So I guess if you know, you're keeping it because it's dangerous, because it's life threatening, because you want to thrill, you know,
that's probably not a good reason.
Best reason. Yeah. Or are you just really fascinated with that species and you just really want to keep them for
that or nothing, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Then maybe that's okay, as long as you take the necessary precautions and things. But I don't know. I guess in my mind, part of it's my wife. When we got engaged, she said, you have to promise that you won't keep venomous snakes while we're married. I said, okay, I guess you're worth not keeping venomous snakes, you know. And so you know, some
just like the state law, just going into snakes. Exactly.
So and that's what I said. I'm like, it's kind of an easy choice because I can't keep them anyway, so I won't tell her that. But you know, yes, honey, I agree not to keep them in captivity, but I don't agree that I won't go play with them in the wild.
Find them. Exactly. Absolutely.
So. And you know, that's not to say that I might not get bit in the future in their habitat, because, you know, we've kind of come close on a couple occasions. A few living landmines, as we call them.
Absolutely.
Aatrox,
and I mean,
West Texas and in Arizona.
At least the one positive to that, right? And maybe this again speaks into the considerations if you're going to try and keep them. And you really highlighted this in terms of making sure you had the antivenom, but then it would also be the additional step of making sure anyone who would prospectively treat you is familiar with the fact, A, that you have it, and B, what that care would look like, even use, and would trust your supply, right? I know that becomes a big issue too, right? It is, you do have your own antivenom, sure, but if you don't have a pre-established relationship and procedure, then if you just turn up, they're not. Didn't someone tried to turn up and they thought antivenom was just venom that they had milked from the snake, right? They just had it like in a vial, and if they put that into it, they're just doubling down. So I mean, like you can see why a physician would look at that skeptically, especially in the moment if there's been no prearrangement around it. So
I think that's part of it too, is having that emergency plan and making the doctor in your area or
aware of it, right?
Aware of it, or at least the hospital. Hey, I'm keeping these snakes. I'm
right. And if you're not willing to engage that conversation, then that tells you all you need to know. On the front end of saying you can't even talk to someone about it.
So I think. Otherwise, I mean, I guess, we live in America and Americans like dangerous things. I mean, how many guns do people own? And maybe I have a little bit of a different attitude, because when I was thinking, do I want to own a gun? And I thought about, like, I counted up all the events that I had known about, people I've known that have had either good or bad experiences with guns, like they've defended themselves from an attacker or something. I counted up one, maybe two of those events where they defended themselves, and I counted up like 12 or 13 of people, either
with negative outcomes of
serious consequences, to a gunshot or whatever. And I'm like, okay, the risk is not there for me. I don't need a gun. I live in a very, very safe area,
And to that same point, are you adequately trained to ensure to avoid negative outcomes? Right?
Well, and I sleepwalk too, which is, a whole wild card where, I have these waking dreams where I think I'm experiencing something and I'm asleep, but I'm walking around. And so, that factored heavily into that decision.
That's probably
not a good choice to throw a gun into that mix.
Wild card. Okay.
Exactly.
Here we go.
So, I mean, I think that's the kind of consideration you need to take, because it is a serious thing and it could have consequences not only for you, but those around you, those in your city, those in your state, those in your, country. If it's a crazy enough thing, although our country doesn't seem to want to.
Today's modern super animals.
Yeah, exactly. We need guns for flying squirrels and electric eels.
The flying squirrel. Oh my gosh. Very good.
I can turn 5 guns into 1 gun. So for all of you out there who just need to keep a venomous reptile, we're not saying that it can't be done. You can do it. It could even be your first reptile, what am I trying to say? Captive. your first captive reptile. If you do things responsibly and reasonable order, I don't see why that wouldn't be the case. But be advanced, be responsible.
The criteria there is incredibly, incredibly hard to the point where I can theoretically imagine someone. I don't know. I haven't known this person, whoever that would be.
Right. Yeah. That would be a very unique person out there, I think. So, yeah. Not saying that it can't be done. Well, I mean, one of my first pets was a rattlesnake,
and wasn't fine. Man, his ear's going to be burning. Wasn't Scott's, first pet or certainly interaction or something with, I think, a red belly black snake or something like that, in Australia, I think it happens more often, right? Because they're just the quantity and sort of the rate of interaction and all those things. It happens.
Whether they know it or not.
Right.
You're picking up a snake and they don't know. Yeah. I was watching some YouTube video and it was in Australia, and I think Brother Nature, he's like a YouTube guy, flipped a piece of tin up in Cape York and found a female death adder with a bunch of newborn babies right next to her. And he was picking them up with tongs and putting them in the palm of his hand, these little baby death adders. And I'm like, I don't know if you should be promoting. And, he put in some disclaimer at the end of the video, like, do as, don't do as
do as I say, not as I do, or whatever. Yeah.
So I'm like, I don't know if that's really going to carry the same message as somebody going, oh, wow, you can hold those? I was like, come on. And, I guess when I was over there, I had a friend that was cleaning out a Death Adder cage, and he handed it to me and said, here, hold this for a second. I'm like, this is a Death Adder. What are you doing? Like, okay, I'm good. Take it back. It's just kind of like, oh man. And of course it didn't bite me, and nothing came of it, and it was as captive and calm and easygoing snake. But still, it's like, here, hold this hand grenade. You should have 20 seconds, it's okay. Like,
wrong ratio, 19.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, just, think it through. It's a big decision, a big consequences if things go wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Potential death. So, that's a serious thing. Now, I mean, my work, I tell people this all the time that come and work with, I'm like, always keep it in the back of your mind. This is a deadly virus. Don't get complacent just because you've been doing it for long enough and, you're good at it. And, now it's like, I can chat with my friend while I'm infecting these mice or, it's like, no, the most dangerous thing you do is hold a vial full of concentrated virus in your hand. That's not great, so. Be always remember that. And I think that applies here. Always keep it in the back of your mind. I'm messing with a snake that if it bites me, I could end up dead, and
complacency
and act accordingly, and if you don't want to be alive, that's not the way to go out. Don't do that. Do us a favor and don't do it that way either. So if you don't care about your own life and so you're going to keep reptile, that's not a good reason either. That's not being advanced or responsible. So, well, hopefully we did okay there, Eric.
Yeah. Hopefully. I'd be curious to the extent that there are points that we didn't kind of hit on, or if there's sort of the conceit of the thing is even different than what we had imagined. But.
Sure. Yeah. And I think too, we said, we might expand it into other areas, but we didn't really expand it much into other areas. We kind of stayed on venomous. So, and I did give up my venomous snakes when I did find out it was illegal, and I gave them away to somebody else. So, who
I certainly shouldn't have said it was illegal.
Exactly. Yeah. And, I guess I should have looked up in that part of, I'm not using myself as an example of good behavior here. This is kind of the, it turned out okay. But, when I was living in Germany, my parents were watching my snakes, and my mom came in my room and heard the rattlesnake just rattling away, and was looking in the cage and couldn't see. And then she looked and it was sitting on top of the cage. I don't know how it got out or anything, and they don't know how either. And it was like a few inches from her face. And this is a con color, maybe a faded rattlesnake.
A very nasty bite.
Yeah. And I was so glad that my mom didn't get bit on the nose by a con color. That would have been horrible. So, the risks are there. And she, got out of the room as quick as she could, shoved a towel under the door, called my dad, you got to get home. The rattlesnake's loose, and they got it, my dad came home and it was just sunning itself on the windowsill, and he just, got it back in the cage with a hook or something. So, but not a great experience. And that was another reason when I got back from Germany, I'm like, okay, I need to move these on to somebody else, because this is not worth losing my mom to, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So it's not just necessarily us that, faces those consequences. So, all right. Well, let us know if you have anything else to add or want us to cover in this regard, but thanks again for the suggestion, Eric. And we appreciate it and had fun talking about it. It's an interesting topic for sure. Because I really enjoy venomous snakes. I mean,
they're cool.
Some of those rattlesnake species, I'd love to keep those, those white specks and, maybe a willard eye or something if they were legal. Things like that are just really cool. So I don't know, maybe when my wife passes away, I can start keeping venomous snakes.
Oh my God.
As an old man.
Oh goodness.
That's what I tell everybody. Once Heidi dies, I can take up wingsuiting and free climbing and venomous reptile handling. Do all those risky behaviors she kept me from. You will not.
You made it 2 days further.
Oh boy, yeah, good times. Well, anything cool in the world of herpetology or herpetoculture that you've seen over the last bit?
Yeah, I've been, well, as I say, mostly it's been this podcast stuff. The show with Dr. Maxey was great.
I'll have to listen to that. That sounds good.
Yeah. The Andrew Holycross on Snake Talk as well. Super interesting. So that's focused on Rhizonos principally obscurus. And Dustin had sent it to me, and I had said, yeah, I had seen that on there. It was, it certainly had it saved in the queue, but he was like, no, really. And I tend to agree. There's a really meaty section in the middle that I think will be helpful. Not that it gives anything away, but just in terms of the ideation and thinking through, and like it's supportive of some ideas and also, instructive and guiding on others and things. I still, it doesn't make the Palencio possibility seem that much more plausible, but nevertheless, at least it doesn't hurt. Right. And it's super interesting. So yeah, both of those were super good. Additionally, I've been listening to a lot of the Colubrid and Colubroid. I think we are going to talk to Zach about something that'll go into our, field herping mega series, our herping to a list mini series, a specific idea there that I think will be really good. I'm excited to talk to Joe Mendelson. Love to talk to Corey Martin here about the trip, Jordan Parrott here about the trip. And I know we both have literally dozens of other people that we're trying to make it work with. So yeah, hopefully the sort of content that we've been putting out is of interest, because I think the stuff in the near future will be similar. So hopefully that's good news.
Cool. Yeah. I was listening to Scott and Ty Eiper on Chris Aplin's podcast over, where is he at? Is that Trap Talk?
I think so. Yeah.
He's putting out some really cool stuff though. His talk with
Brian was cool.
Yeah. That was awesome. Their trip over there. And so kind of fun. So I'd recommend that one too with the Eipers. Some new news to me was the description of Varanus citrinus. I didn't know that had been described. So we had both had that common memory of seeing these, what are called blue stripe monitors or whatever that were up at Crocosaurus Cove. And I guess they've been formally described now. So that's kind of cool. They occur over in kind of the,
Gulf of Carpentaria.
Yeah. Gulf of Carpentaria region. And it's kind of cool. Absolutely. Now, if for the list herper in me, I'm like, oh great, now I got another
form for the list.
Yeah, I always thought it would.
And not even a form; it's a species. Yeah, so depending,
new species. So
anything that's actually a species is probably a form. So
right, yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, it was known about for many years before, because I saw it in 2011, and
we saw it in 2019. Yeah.
And it was described in 2022 or 2023?
Yep, 22. Like
that, so. Yeah. I'm sure there will be more described.
Absolutely.
So the list will grow. Ever expand. Give me more reasons to go back to Australia.
There are worse things.
Yeah, for sure. What else? I think there's other stuff I've seen, but my brain's kind of fried, I think. I don't know. But yeah, lots of good stuff out there.
Absolutely.
I love hearing about herp trips, so I'm excited to chat with some things. And I'd gotten that podcast, the Snake Talk podcast, had fallen off my list for some reason, so I hadn't been listening to that for a while. So looks like there's a lot of good content there to catch up on. So thanks for bringing that to the forefront of my mind again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so good times. Well, I guess that'll do it for us. And
cool.
Thanks for listening, and we'll hopefully catch you again next time for Reptile Fight Club.